Hello, friends. I'm glad to present a new author's story, which I voiced especially for you. Enjoy listening.
My wife chose the most ordinary Tuesday to declare war. She called me at work with an invitation to a romantic lunch, used that sweet voice she used to ask me to buy her a new purse or pay for another yoga class, and even suggested we meet at the restaurant where we celebrated our first anniversary. Linda had always been a master at creating beautiful sets for her plays, but this time she was setting the stage for the final act of our marriage. It was a shame she had no idea that I had known the script by heart for a long time and had prepared some unexpected lines for her. My name is Daniel Whitman. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a senior software developer for a company that specializes in creating database management systems for large corporations. It sounds boring, and it is, but that boredom earns me about $120,000 a year, plus company stock, plus various bonuses for successful projects. In Vancouver, with its insane real estate prices, this income allows you to live comfortably but without excesses. I'm the kind of person who is commonly referred to as an introvert. I don't like noisy parties. I prefer to spend weekends at home with a book or a movie, and on vacation I go to quiet places where you can hike in the mountains or sit by the lake with a fishing rod. I don't have many friends, but those who do have known me for many years and can count on my support in any situation. I'm not one to pop up with advice or try to cheer everyone up, but if I need to listen or help, I'm always ready. In my work, I'm meticulous to the point of nerdiness. I can sit for hours over one line of code if I feel that it is written incorrectly. My colleagues sometimes make fun of me and call me a perfectionist, but it is thanks to this meticulousness that our projects are delivered on time and work without fail. I love the feeling when a complex system begins to function exactly as it was designed, when all the elements fall into place and begin to interact as parts of a single mechanism. I married 8 years ago to Linda Harrison, who was then working as an assistant realtor in a small firm. She was a beautiful, ambitious girl with big plans for her life, and I was flattered that she chose me among all her admirers. Linda knew how to be charming when she wanted to get something, and in the early years of marriage, I enjoyed spoiling her with gifts, vacations, and whatever my salary could afford. Linda now runs her own real estate agency specializing in luxury homes in upscale Vancouver neighborhoods. She drives a white BMW, wears designer clothes, and regularly posts photos from expensive events on social media. To the outside world, we look like a successful couple. He's a computer programmer with a good salary. She's a real estate entrepreneur. They live in a beautiful home and go on vacation to Europe. The truth is that for the past 3 years, our marriage has been more like a business partnership between two people who are just used to living under the same roof. We sleep in separate bedrooms under the pretense that I go to bed late because of work, and she gets up early to go jogging. We eat at different times, watch different shows, go out with different friends. Sex hasn't happened between us in over a year, and we both pretend it's normal for couples our age. Sitting in my office on the 23rd floor of an office building in downtown Vancouver, I pondered how Linda had changed over the years. Or perhaps she had always been this way and I just hadn't noticed, blinded by her beauty and confidence. She became more demanding, more calculating, more focused on the material side of life. Every conversation we had was about money in one way or another, to renovate the kitchen, to buy a new car, to go to the Maldives because her friend Carol had just returned from there with amazing pictures. Outside the window stretched the bay with its gray waters and distant mountains hidden by the October haze. Vancouver welcomed fall with the traditional rain and fog, but today was a relatively clear day, and the sun was breaking through the broken clouds, reflecting in the glass facades of the skyscrapers. I was trying to concentrate on my work. In front of me on the monitor was a complex database management system in which for the third day, I couldn't find a bug that sometimes caused transactions to be lost. A programmer's work requires total immersion. When debugging a complex architecture, the slightest distraction can throw off your train of thought and you have to start over. That's why I always turned off notifications on my phone while working, except for calls from the closest people. When Linda's number popped up on the screen, I was surprised. She rarely called me during work hours, and usually only for really important matters. "Daniel?" My wife's voice sounded unusually elevated, almost triumphant, as if she were telling me good news. "Do you have time to talk?" Sure, I'm listening, I answered, leaning back in my chair and looking away from the monitor with endless lines of code. I wanted to invite you to lunch today, to the restaurant. There's something important we need to discuss face to face. There was something artificial in her tone, contrived, like an actress who hadn't learned her part very well. 8 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the slightest nuances in Linda's voice, when she was sincere, when she was hiding something, when she was preparing the ground for another request for money. To a restaurant? I asked her again. That's quite a surprise. What happened? Nothing happened. Just want to spend time together, to talk quietly without fuss. We don't see each other much these days. That was true. Our work schedules didn't overlap much. I was in the office by 9 in the morning and back around 7 in the evening, while Linda worked weekends, was often late for client meetings, and was constantly traveling to some professional events. We might not have spoken normally for days at a time, limiting ourselves to brief phrases about everyday things. Okay, I said after a short pause. Shotawani, where are we meeting and what time? Syson's 1 o'clock. I've already made a reservation. Syson's is one of the most expensive restaurants in Vancouver, located on the waterfront overlooking the bay. We've only been there a few times, mostly for special occasions like birthdays or anniversaries. It seemed excessive for a casual midweek lunch, but I didn't bother to ask about the reasons for this choice. It's a deal. I'll see you later. See you later, darling. And Daniel, wear that blue suit I bought you last Christmas. You look really good in it. After she hung up, I sat with the phone in my hands for a few more minutes, pondering the strangeness of this conversation. Linda had never been a fan of spontaneous romantic gestures. Her every act was carefully planned and had a specific purpose: an invitation to an expensive lunch in the middle of the workday, a request to wear a certain suit. All this suggested that she was preparing some important announcement. Perhaps she wanted to talk about a new business, a big sale that would earn her a nice commission. Or she was going to suggest moving to a more expensive neighborhood, buying a bigger house, taking out a renovation loan. Linda was always ambitious about our standard of living and was always looking to upgrade her status. Now tell us in the comments, where are you hearing this story from? Maybe someone is traveling to work in the morning, and someone else, on the other hand, is coming home after a hard day. And if you've ever had a situation when your spouse invited you to an unexpected romantic dinner that turned out to be not romantic at all, put a like. Let's see how common such family dramas are. I went back to work, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to Linda's call and the upcoming dinner. Something in her voice, in her choice of location, in all this sudden initiative seemed suspicious to me. Over the years of marriage, I had learned to trust my intuition when it came to my wife's behavior. And now my intuition was strongly suggesting that this lunch would be more than just a nice time at a nice restaurant. I met Linda 9 years ago at a party at a colleague of mine, Mike, who was celebrating a promotion at his new apartment in the Kitsilano neighborhood. I usually avoid such events, but Mike was not just a coworker, but one of the few people in the office with whom I developed a genuine friendship. He insisted on my presence, promising that the party would be small and not drag on into the night. Linda showed up there in the company of her friend Carol, who was dating one of Mike's friends. I noticed her at once, not because she was the prettiest girl in the room, although she was undoubtedly beautiful, but because she held herself with some special confidence. She wore a simple black dress that emphasized her slender figure, and her hair was gathered in an elegant bun with a few loose strands that softly framed her face. But what struck me most was the way she talked to people, listening attentively, asking intelligent questions, laughing genuinely, not out of politeness. We struck up a conversation by chance when we were both on the balcony, escaping the noise and tobacco smoke. Linda was out there with a glass of wine, and I was just getting some fresh air. Outside the windows were the lights of the city and the dark bay, and the stars twinkled in the distance. "Are you a friend of Mike's?" she asked, leaning against the balcony railing. "Colleague," I answered. "We work at the same company. Are you?" "Friends of friends of friends," she laughed. "Carol is dating Tom, and Tom is friends with Mike. It's a long chain of acquaintances." We talked for over an hour. She told me she was working as an assistant realtor for a small firm, studying the real estate market and dreaming of opening her own agency. She had ambitious plans to become the best realtor in the city, to work with luxury real estate, to help people find their dream homes. She talked about it with such enthusiasm that I wanted to believe in the success of her plans. I told her about my work as a programmer, that I like to solve complex technical problems and create systems that simplify people's lives. Linda listened attentively, asking questions about how computer programs work, laughing at my attempts to explain complex things in simple words. "You are very patient," she said at the end of the conversation. Not everyone can explain their work in such an accessible way to someone who doesn't understand it at all. As I walked her to her car, she gave me her phone number and suggested we meet this weekend. We went to a cafe in Gastown, then walked along the waterfront, and then I took her to a movie. The movie wasn't very interesting, but I enjoyed just sitting next to her in the darkened auditorium, feeling her presence, hearing her quiet laughter in the funny scenes. In the first few months of our relationship, Linda seemed like the perfect woman for me. She was smart, ambitious, beautiful, but easy to communicate with. She did not demand constant attention, did not make jealousy scenes, did not try to control my every move. She had her own interests, her own circle of friends, her own plans for the future. We spent time together because we were interested in each other, not because of obligation or habit. Linda loved to cook, and on weekends we often had dinners at her house or mine. She would experiment with recipes she found on the internet or in magazines, and I would help chop vegetables and wash dishes. After dinner, we would watch movies or just talk about work, plans, dreams. She wanted to travel around Europe, study the architecture of different cities, and then use this experience in her work with clients. I would tell her about new technologies I was learning, about projects I was working on. Sex between us was good, not passionate to the point of madness, but gentle, natural, comfortable. We weren't the kind of couple who couldn't tear ourselves away from each other, but we enjoyed the close physical contact. Linda wasn't shy about her body, didn't create artificial obstacles, didn't use intimacy as a tool of manipulation. After a year of the relationship, we started living together. First, she moved in with me, then we rented a bigger apartment, and after another year, we started saving for a down payment to buy a house. Linda insisted on living not in an apartment, but in a house with a garden, a garage, and the possibility to remodel it to her liking. "An apartment is a temporary place to live," she said. "A house is an investment in the future, a place where you can create a real family home." Our wedding was small, with only the closest friends and relatives. Linda didn't want a lavish celebration. She said it would be better to spend the money on a honeymoon in Italy and on furnishing the house. We spent 2 weeks traveling through Tuscany, living in small hotels, eating in family restaurants, walking through ancient streets. At the time, I thought I had found the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I noticed the first changes in Linda's character about 2 years after the wedding. She started talking about money more often, comparing our standard of living to that of her friends and coworkers. Buying a new car turned into a months-long epic with studying models, visiting showrooms, discussing credit terms. Linda used to be practical about money, but now she was becoming demanding. "Look at the car Carol bought," she said, showing pictures on her phone. "A BMW X5, fully loaded, and we're still driving your Honda." My Honda was a reliable, fuel-efficient car that suited me just fine for commuting. But Linda needed something more status-oriented that would fit her idea of social standing. In the end, we bought a Lexus, not as expensive as Carol's BMW, but much more than we really needed. Linda's career was going well. 3 years after we met, she moved to a larger real estate firm specializing in luxury real estate. A year later, she opened her own agency. Her income grew, but her demands grew with it. Now she needed more expensive clothes for meetings with clients, more prestigious office, more modern equipment. "It's an investment in the business," she explained when I was surprised at the size of the expenditures. "Clients need to see that I'm successful. No one would trust an agent who looked poor to sell $1 million house." There was logic to it, and I didn't argue. My income was growing too. Raises and bonuses allowed us to live comfortably, even with Linda's increased demands. But gradually I began to notice that conversations about money, shopping, and status were taking up more and more of our conversations. Linda began to compare me more often to the husbands of her friends. Carol's husband had started his own construction company and was now earning considerably more than me. Her business partner Rachel's husband worked at an investment bank and received huge bonuses. The neighbor's husband was in real estate and had recently bought a lakeside home. Daniel, Linda said during one of these conversations, maybe you should think about changing jobs or starting your own business. You're a talented programmer. Why not become an independent consultant? I explained that I liked my job, that I had a good team, interesting projects, stable income, and social guarantees. The risks of entrepreneurship did not appeal to me, and the prospects for a significant increase in earnings in my field were limited. But Linda didn't understand or didn't want to understand my position. You're too cautious, she said. You're afraid to take risks. That's why you stay where you are. Look at other men. They don't sit at the same job all their lives. They develop, build a career, make money. These conversations started to annoy me. It seemed unfair to me that the woman who married me, knowing my profession and my character, now demanded from me radical changes. I was not an ambitious entrepreneur, nor had I ever been. I was a reliable, stable man who earns an honest living and provides for his family. Sex between us became less frequent and mechanical. Linda more often cited fatigue, headaches, stress at work. When intimacy did occur, I felt she was doing her marital duty rather than enjoying our intimacy. Romantic gestures on her part had all but disappeared. She stopped cooking on weekends, preferring to order takeout or go to restaurants. I just don't have time to stand at the stove, she explained. Business requires full commitment. Besides, we can afford not to cook ourselves. Perhaps that was true. The real estate agency did take up a lot of her time and energy. Clients were calling at all hours of the day and night. Houses had to be shown on weekends, and potential sellers had to be met in the evenings. But I missed that simple domestic intimacy that I had in the early years of our relationship. I had my first really serious suspicions a year and a half ago, in the spring. Linda began to stay late at work much more often than before, and these delays were rarely related to specific deals or clients. She answered my questions evasively. Meetings with investors, negotiations on new projects, professional events. One evening she came home around 11 when I had already gone to bed. I heard her quietly climbing the stairs, going into the bathroom, taking a long shower. When she finally got into her bed in the guest bedroom, she smelled of an unfamiliar perfume, not the kind she usually used. What was that smell? I asked the next morning at breakfast. What smell? She asked, not looking up from the phone. Perfume. You smelled like an unfamiliar perfume last night. Oh, it's Chanel. Rachel let me try a new fragrance she'd recently bought. I like it. I'm thinking of getting one too. The explanation sounded plausible, but something in her tone was unsettling. Linda had always been open about little things, willingly telling me about meetings with her friends, what they discussed, what they bought, where they went. But here she answered briefly and immediately switched to another topic. A few days later, I noticed that she began to dress differently. Previously, Linda had chosen outfits that were practical, beautiful, stylish, but suitable for working with clients. Now her closet included more revealing dresses, brighter cosmetics, more expensive jewelry. She explained it by the fact that image in the field of elite real estate is extremely important, that clients should see her as a successful, attractive businesswoman. The cell phone became a forbidden zone for her. She used to leave it quietly on the table. She could ask me to answer the phone if she was busy. Now she always had the phone with her. The screen was locked with a password, and she answered it in another room or out on the terrace. Work information, she explained. Client confidentiality. You do realize that real estate sales data can't be disclosed to outsiders. I wasn't an outsider. I was her husband. But Linda obviously didn't see the difference, or didn't want to. Suspicion is one thing, proof is another. As a programmer, I'm used to working with facts, not speculation. When there is a bug in the code, it's not enough to just assume where it might be. You have to systematically check every line, every function, until you find the exact cause of the problem. I decided to approach studying Linda's behavior in the same way. It started with a simple observation. I started recording the time she came home, what mood she was in, what she told me about the past day. Programmers love logs, detailed records of system operation. that helped them understand what was going on at a certain point in time. I set myself up with something like family life logs. During the first 2 weeks, I found that Linda was late for work an average of 3 times a week, with no clear pattern. Sometimes she came in late on Monday and Wednesday, sometimes on Thursday and Friday. Sometimes she disappeared for a few hours at the weekend on the pretext of meeting with clients. Every time she returned home after a long absence, she was in high spirits. Not tired, as a woman who had worked with cranky clients all day should be, but rather enthusiastic and energetic. Her accounts of work affairs were sparing in general. "Sonner, how are things going?" I asked. "Fine, showing a house in West Vancouver to a family from California. Very demanding clients, but solvent. How long did that take?" "Well, first we met at the office, then we went to look at a few properties, then we discussed the details at a coffee shop. You know how it is with serious buyers. You have to explain everything thoroughly." The answers sounded plausible, but they didn't have the vividness with which Linda used to talk about her work. She could talk for half an hour about how she'd shown the house to a young couple, what funny demands they had, how they'd argued about the number of bedrooms. Now she was confining herself to formal phrases, as if reporting back to her superiors. The next step was to explore her social media. Linda was an active user of Instagram and Facebook, regularly posting photos from work, meetings with friends, beautiful places she visited. I began to carefully analyze her posts, paying attention to geolocations, time of publication, people who appeared in the photos. An interesting discrepancy came to light. On days when Linda was supposedly working late into the evening, her Instagram was filled with photos from restaurants, cafes, parks, places that had nothing to do with real estate shows. What's more, some of these locations were in neighborhoods where her agency didn't operate. A post from last Thursday, a photo of a gourmet meal at a Robson Street restaurant published at 7:30 in the evening, seemed particularly suspicious. On that day, Linda said she was late at work because of an urgent meeting with investors and didn't get home until 10:30. It turned out that the urgent meeting was at an expensive restaurant and lasted over 2 hours. I started to check her posts more systematically, comparing them with what she told me at home. The picture was becoming clearer and clearer. Linda was lying to me about where she was spending her time. Not every day, not about everything, but regularly and confidently enough to make it look like a well-established system of deception. Programmers are good with data, but I didn't have access to the most important data. Her phone calls, her texts, her location history. Linda had become very careful with her phone, never leaving it unattended, always locking the screen. Attempts to look for the password were unsuccessful. She entered it too quickly and carefully. Then I decided to use the technical possibilities that my profession gave me. We had a common Wi-Fi network in our house through which all devices were connected. As a network administrator, I could see which devices were connecting to the network, how much traffic they were consuming, and which sites they were accessing. Of course, modern applications use encryption, but I could still get some information. Examination of the router logs showed that Linda's phone regularly connected to unfamiliar Wi-Fi networks. I could tell from the names of the networks that they were hotels, restaurants, and shopping centers in different parts of the city. Some of these places I recognized, expensive establishments that we had never visited together and that had nothing to do with her agency's work. One Wi-Fi network name in particular caught my eye, Devero_construction_guest. I Googled the name and discovered that Devero Construction was a large construction company specializing in luxury residential real estate in the Vancouver area. The company was owned and operated by Mark Devereaux, a 40-year-old businessman with an impeccable reputation in the construction industry. The company's website had a picture of Devereaux, a tall, athletically built man with graying temples and a confident look. He looked exactly how a successful entrepreneur should look: expensive suit, expensive watch, perfect smile. Under the photo was a brief biography. Graduate of the University of British Columbia, 20 years in the construction business, projects totaling over $500 million. Linda's phone connected to the Devero Construction guest network regularly, sometimes for hours at a time. This could not have been a coincidence or a one-time work meeting. A regular relationship clearly existed between my wife and Mark Devero. I began researching Devero in more detail. His Instagram was full of photos, construction sites, finished homes, business meetings, yacht vacations, ski resorts. The man clearly loved to show off his success and lifestyle. But more importantly, some of the posts had group photos from various construction industry events. In one such photo, taken at a Realtors Association gala dinner 3 months ago, I saw a familiar face. In the corner of the photo, among a group of smiling people in evening gowns, stood Linda. She was wearing the same black dress she had bought specifically for the event, but had told me at the time that she was going there with Rachel and other coworkers. In the photo, Linda was not standing with Rachel, but next to Mark Devereaux. Not up close, but close enough that it didn't look like a coincidence. Moreover, after examining other photos from the same event on different Instagram accounts, I found another shot of them talking alone at the bar. It wasn't enough for definitive conclusions, but enough to understand the direction of further search. I began checking Devereaux's social media regularly, correlating the time and place of his posts with Linda's absence from home. A pattern emerged fairly quickly. On days when Linda was late for work or disappeared on the pretext of meeting with clients, Devereaux often posted photos from restaurants, bars, hotels, the same places where, according to the Wi-Fi logs, my wife's phone was located. The coincidences were too frequent and precise to be coincidental. The decisive proof came a month ago. Linda said she was going to Whistler for the weekend to show a mountain home to potential buyers from Seattle. Left Saturday morning, returned Sunday night, telling them the clients were very difficult, took a long time to choose, finally decided to think again. On Saturday night, Devereaux posted a photo of a sunset over a lake in Whistler on Instagram with the caption, "Perfect evening in the mountains." Sunday morning, breakfast on the terrace of the same hotel where the geotag suggests they were staying. And on Monday, I discovered that Linda's phone hadn't connected to the internet at all these days via the cellular network, meaning she had purposely turned off data transmission so as not to leave a digital trail. But she had forgotten about automatically backing up photos to cloud storage via Wi-Fi. When I accessed our shared family Google Photos account, it revealed photos that Linda clearly didn't intend to show me. The pictures were taken at the same hotel in Whistler, in the same room from which Devereaux had photographed the sunset. One photo showed the edge of a man's hand holding a glass of wine. In another, a reflection in the bathroom mirror where the man's silhouette could be discerned. In the third, two shadows in the snow, clearly belonging to people walking side by side and holding hands. Linda was careful, but not so careful as to completely cover all tracks. Her professional expertise in real estate didn't extend to understanding digital technology. And my years of experience with data allowed me to find information where the average person wouldn't have noticed it. I spent the next few weeks putting together as complete a picture of their relationship as possible. I looked at Linda's credit cards, although we shared a bank account. It turned out that she regularly spent money at expensive lingerie stores, bought perfume she didn't use at home, and filled up at gas stations in areas where she didn't have work sites. The most painful find was an $800 purchase at a jewelry store 2 weeks ago. Linda had no new jewelry at home, which meant that this gift was not meant for her. On the same day, judging by Devereaux's Instagram, it was his birthday. He posted a photo of a cake with candles in the circle of friends and colleagues. My wife spent almost $1,000 on a gift for her lover for his birthday. The money we were saving for home renovations, vacations, and our life together, she spent on the man she had been cheating on me with for over a year. Further research revealed the extent of the deception. Linda met with Devereaux not only on evenings and weekends, but sometimes during work hours. She rented a hotel room downtown where they would visit for a few hours in the middle of the day. She paid for it with her personal card, but transferred money to that card from our joint account. Her social media posts on the days she met her lover were especially cynical. Photos of beautiful flowers with the caption, "Husband spoils." Selfies in an expensive restaurant with the comment, "Romantic dinner with my lover." Shots of gifts for the wedding anniversary. All the while she was dating Devereaux and spending our combined money to support a double life. I realized that the information gathered was already enough for a divorce on my terms. The fact of infidelity had been proven by multiple circumstantial and direct evidence. Any family law attorney would have said I was in a great negotiating position, but I was in no hurry to act. Programmers know when you discover a serious bug in a system, you must first fully understand its nature, all the problems associated with it, and the possible consequences of fixing it. Only after a comprehensive analysis can you start making changes. Linda was planning something more than just an affair on the side. Her behavior, spending, and changes in her character suggested that she was preparing for a dramatic change in her life. Maybe a divorce, maybe a move to the next level with Devereaux. I needed to find out what her plans were before she made them. And when Linda called me today with an invitation to lunch at an expensive restaurant, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. She was about to reveal her cards, and I had to be prepared for any eventuality. In my jacket pocket was a flash drive with copies of all the materials I had collected. Photos, screenshots, financial documents, connection logs. A year and a half of systematic work fit into a small electronic medium. It was enough to ruin any plans Linda had to get half of my assets in the divorce. But first I wanted to hear her side of the story. I wanted to understand how far she was willing to go in her deception, what kind of game she was playing, and then I wanted to show her that the game was over. The restaurant Syson's was located on the waterfront in the most prestigious area of Vancouver, in a building where every square meter cost more than my annual salary. The panoramic windows overlooked the bay with its yachts and water cabs, and the interior was in the style of modern elegance. Light wood, leather, subdued lighting, fresh flowers on every table. Bankers, politicians, big business owners, people for whom a $300 lunch bill was chump change, dined here. I arrived 10 minutes ahead of schedule and asked the maitre d' to escort me to the table Linda had reserved. The table was by the window, with a beautiful view of the water and mountains. A waiter in an immaculate white shirt brought the menu and offered me an aperitif while I waited for my companion. "Water, please," I said, looking at the prices on the menu. $38 for a Caesar salad, $52 for a salmon steak, $70 for a beef fillet. For a typical weekday lunch, these were astronomical sums, but Linda clearly wanted to impress. The only question was who she wanted to impress. She showed up at 1 o'clock sharp, and I realized she was preparing for this meeting as an important business event. A new black dress from some expensive designer I didn't know, but I could guess the price. Pearl earrings I didn't give her. Hair by a hairdresser, not a home style. Makeup that emphasized her cheekbones and made her look more expressive. Linda looked amazing and she knew it. She moved with that special confidence that women have when they feel irresistible. Several men at neighboring tables were giving her glances, and she noticed it by lifting her chin slightly. "Darling," she said as she approached the table, "sorry I'm late. The traffic was terrible." She leaned over to kiss my cheek, and I smelled the same unfamiliar scent of perfume I'd smelled so many times in recent months. Expensive, exquisite. Clearly not the one on her dressing table at home. "You're not late," I replied, getting up to help her sit down. "I just got here a little early." The waiter materialized next to the table, as if waiting for a signal. "What will you have, madam?" "Champagne," Linda said without even looking at the wine list. "A Veuve Clicquot, if you have it." "Certainly, madam." "Glass or bottle?" "A bottle. It's a special day." I raised my eyebrows, surprised by this choice. The Veuve Clicquot in this restaurant cost about $200 a bottle. For a midweek lunch, well, that was more than odd. "Special?" I interjected. "Did something happen?" "I'll tell you later," Linda smiled. "Let's order food first. I'm starving." She studied the menu with the look of someone who didn't care about prices. She chose oysters as an appetizer, then lobster with truffle sauce. I limited myself to a Caesar salad and a salmon steak. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because my appetite was gone. My intuition told me that this meal was going to cost me a lot more than the numbers on the menu. When the waiter brought the champagne, Linda waited until we were served and raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, looking me in the eye. "Here's to new beginnings," I repeated, clinking glasses with her. The champagne was excellent, dry, with a subtle flavor and a long aftertaste. Linda drank it with gusto, clearly savoring the moment. I took a couple of sips for propriety, but alcohol in the middle of the workday didn't appeal to me. "How are things going at work?" I asked, trying to make casual conversation. "Fine," she replied. "So, Mom, business is growing, clients are happy, plans are ambitious. By the way, I recently met a very interesting man. Mark Devereaux. Have you heard of him?" My insides went cold. Linda had mentioned her lover's name to me for the first time in a year and a half. It couldn't have been an accident. Devereaux? I asked as indifferently as possible. I thought I'd seen that name somewhere. Something to do with construction? Yes, he owns a large construction company, a very successful businessman, a very promising partner. We're discussing the possibility of joint projects. What kind of projects? Luxury real estate. His company builds houses, my agency sells them. Synergy, you know. Plus, he has great connections in the business community, which opens up new opportunities. Linda spoke of Devereaux with an enthusiasm that had long since disappeared from her accounts of our life together. There was admiration, respect, something close to a crush in her voice. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed it was really just a business relationship. Sounds interesting, I said. Is he married? Divorced, Linda answered quickly. 3 years now. He said that his ex-wife didn't understand the specifics of his business, always complaining that he didn't spend enough time at home. I see. Doesn't he have any kids? A teenage daughter. She lives with her mother, but she sees her father regularly. Mark's a very responsible parent, despite his busy schedule. I listened to her talk about Devereaux's virtues and realized she was setting the stage for something more. A woman doesn't praise another man in front of her husband for nothing, especially if that man is her lover, whom her husband supposedly knows nothing about. Appetizers are here. Linda's oysters look like a work of art, beautifully arranged on ice with lemon and sauces. My salad was flawless too, but I ate mechanically, concentrating on what my wife was saying. "Soy you." "You know, Daniel," she said, setting aside the empty oyster shell, "I've been thinking a lot about our life lately. What we've accomplished, what we're striving for, what the future holds. And what conclusions have I come to? That we've become very different people. What united us 8 years ago no longer works. We have different goals, different ideas about how to live our lives." Linda spoke as calmly as if she were discussing the weather forecast. No emotion, no sign of regret or doubt. It was the voice of someone who had made a final decision and was now simply informing it. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she was getting at. "I mean that we both deserve better. You deserve a woman who shares your interests, your lifestyle, your approach to your career, and I deserve a man who understands my ambitions and is willing to support them. The entrees are here. Linda's lobster was cooked to perfection. My salmon looked delicious, but neither I nor apparently she wanted to eat. We both realized that food wasn't the main thing here. "Linda," I said quietly, "are you saying you don't feel happy in our marriage?" "I'm saying we both don't feel happy," she replied. "When was the last time you were truly happy to see me? When was the last time we didn't talk about mundane things, but about what we really cared about?" It was a good question, and I couldn't answer it. Our life together had indeed become a routine, a coexistence of two people under one roof. But it wasn't because we had fallen out of love with each other. It was because one of us had started a relationship on the side. "Son, maybe we should try something different," I suggested. "See a marriage counselor, take a vacation, go somewhere together." Linda shook her head with a look of regret on her face. "Daniel, you're a good man, honest, reliable, decent. Any woman would be happy with you. But I'm no longer the same woman who married you 8 years ago. I've changed, I've grown, I have new needs." "What needs?" "The need for a partner, not a stable housemate. A man who shares my ambitions, not just tolerates them. A man who wants to build an empire, not settle for a clerk's salary." It was insulting but not unexpected. Linda had always thought I wasn't ambitious enough, not aggressive enough in career matters. She used to talk about it in terms of advice and wishes, but now she talks about it as insurmountable differences. "So you mean you want a divorce?" I asked bluntly. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I want a divorce, and I think you do too if you're honest with yourself." Linda sipped her champagne and looked at me with an expression of genuine concern. "We're civilized people, Daniel. We can part handsomely, without scandal or recrimination. Divide the property fairly, stay on good terms." How exactly do you envision a fair division?" I asked. "Well, we bought the house together, so everyone gets half of its value. Cars stay with the people who use them. Furniture and appliances are agreed upon. Bank accounts are shared. Linda stated her terms calmly and confidently, as if she were reading out a prepared document. It was obvious that she had thought out all the details in advance, and perhaps even consulted a lawyer. What about my shares in the company, the bonuses I'll get at the end of the year? I asked. Everything earned during the marriage is subject to division, she replied. That's fair, Daniel. I too have been invested in our mutual success. In what way? I supported you morally, created comfort at home, represented our interests in society. The wife of a successful programmer is also a job, you know. I almost laughed at the cynicism of this statement. The woman who cheated on me with another man for a year and a half, who spent our joint money on gifts for her lover, who lied to me every day, now demanded compensation for moral support? Linda, I said quietly, what if I don't agree to your terms? Her eyes turned cold and there was an expression on her face that I had never seen before. Predatory, calculating, ruthless. Then the divorce won't be as civilized, she said. Then I'll have to tell the court about the way you treated me in the last years of our marriage. Your coldness, your inattention, your unwillingness to support my career ambitions. 40. What are you going to say? I'm saying I have girlfriends who will back up what I'm saying about your dismissive attitude. There are recordings of our conversations where you refuse to discuss my business development plans. There's evidence that you've been restricting my financial options. Linda leaned closer and smiled a smile that gave me goosebumps. Darling, she said in almost a whisper, I'm going to throw you out of my life and take everything I can get my hands on. You can agree to my terms and keep at least something, or you can resist and be left with nothing. For a few seconds, I looked at the woman I'd lived with for 8 years and didn't recognize her. It was a completely different Linda. Cold, cynical, willing to do anything to achieve her goals. Maybe she'd always been like that, and I just hadn't seen that side of her character. What if I have trump cards you don't know about? I asked calmly. Linda laughed heartily, sincerely. What trumps? Daniel, you're an introverted programmer who spent 8 years living in the clouds and didn't notice the obvious things. You had no idea our marriage was falling apart. What trump card could you possibly have? Senator Noam, I've been waiting for this conversation, I said quietly, looking into her eyes. Her smile faded slightly. What do you mean? I mean that I know a lot more about Mark Devereaux than you realize. I know about your meetings, the trip to Whistler, the hotel room downtown, his birthday present. Linda's face turned white as chalk. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, I said calmly. And you know what? I've really been waiting for this conversation. I've been waiting a year and a half. The silence at our table lasted almost a minute. Linda looked at me with wide open eyes, trying to understand how serious my words were and what exactly I knew. Her hand with the champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth, and her breathing became ragged. I watched the confidence fade from her face, giving way to anxiety and confusion. Daniel, she finally said, trying to keep her voice calm, I don't know what you're talking about. Mark Devereaux is my business partner. We are discussing joint projects. In a room at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, I interrupted her. Every other Thursday, 2 to 5 in the afternoon? The color had finally drained from her face. Or at his country home in West Vancouver on Saturdays when you supposedly show houses to clients? I continued calmly. Or maybe at the Blue Water Cafe restaurant where you had dinner 3 weeks ago, the day you told me you were working late. Linda set her glass on the table with a trembling hand. Were you following me? Not exactly. I was analyzing the data. You see, professional deformation, when you notice strange patterns in a system's behavior, you start looking for the causes of failures. I took my cell phone out of my jacket pocket and put it on the table between us. Do you want to see the pictures from your cloud storage? The ones you took in Whistler 2 months ago when you were supposedly showing the house to clients from Seattle? Daniel, it's not what you think it is. Then what is it? I asked, turning on my phone screen and opening the folder of photos. Explain to me what this photo, which shows a man's hand in an expensive Rolex watch, holding a glass of wine, in the same room from which your sunset shots were taken means. On the screen was a photo that Linda had taken at the window of a hotel in Whistler. In the corner of the frame was the hand of a man with the distinctive watch I'd seen in Devereaux's photos on his Instagram. Or this one. I swiped my finger across the screen. The reflection in the bathroom mirror. The silhouette clearly doesn't belong to you. Linda stared at the photos and remained silent. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if she was trying to come up with an explanation, but no words came. This one is particularly interesting. I showed her a picture of two shadows in the snow. Two figures walking side by side and holding hands. The shadow of your skis and the shadow of a man's skis. Coincidentally, the same day Devereaux posted a photo on his Instagram with the caption, "Perfect morning in the mountains." Amazing coincidence, isn't it? Daniel, listen to me. No, now you listen to me, I said, putting my phone away. A year and a half ago, I noticed a change in your behavior. At first, I chalked it up to work stress, fatigue, midlife crisis. Then I started paying attention to details. I took a sip of water, giving her time to process what I was saying. You know what surprised me the most? Not that you had a lover. It's how careless you've become about covering your tracks. Like you thought I was a complete idiot who couldn't put two and two together. I never thought you were an idiot. Then why did you leave your phone connected to the Wi-Fi at his house? Why didn't you turn off automatic photo synchronization? Why did you spend money from our joint account on gifts for him? The last question sounded especially painful. Linda flinched as if I'd hit her. $800 for Tiffany cufflinks, I said calmly. For his birthday, the money we'd been saving for a vacation in Europe. Where did you... Bank statements. We share an account, remember? You suggested it yourself when we bought the house, for transparency in the family budget, as you said at the time. I opened the bank app on my phone and showed her the transaction history screen. Here's a purchase at the jewelry store. Here's a hotel room payment. Here's spending on lingerie at boutiques you didn't wear at home. Here are bills for dinners at restaurants we've never been to together. Linda stared at the numbers on the screen, and I could see the realization of the magnitude of what I knew slowly dawning in her eyes. Would you like to see your phone's connection logs to Wi-Fi networks? I offered. Very interesting data. Devereaux_construction_guest. That network shows up in the logs regularly, sometimes for 5 or 6 hours at a time. You've been spying on me, she whispered. I was analyzing public data to which I had legitimate access as your husband and home network administrator. No hidden cameras, no private investigators, just the information you left yourself. The waiter came to our table to see if our food was okay. We had barely touched our dishes and it seemed strange. Everything's fine, I said with a smile, just caught up in the conversation. When the waiter stepped away, I continued. You know what upset me the most? Not the cheating per se. It was the ease with which you lied to me every day. I'll be late for work. Client meeting, professional event, and every time I could see in your eyes that you enjoyed deceiving me. That's not true. That's exactly right, Linda. You've been enjoying your double life, posting pictures on Instagram of gifts from your beloved husband, while you spend our money having fun with your lover, writing on social media about romantic dinners while you're having dinner with Devereaux. I showed her a screenshot of her Instagram post from a month ago, a photo of a beautiful bouquet of flowers with the caption, "Husband spoiling again." That day, according to her bank statements, she was buying that bouquet herself and then meeting Devereaux at a hotel. The post about our wedding anniversary was particularly cynical, I continued. A picture of a romantic candlelit dinner with the caption, 8 years of happiness. And the next day you spent $300 on dinner with him at the same restaurant. Linda covered her face with her hands. Daniel, stop, please. Why stop? We're civilized people, remember? We're discussing the details of property division. Only now the terms of the negotiation are a little different. I took a flash drive out of my pocket and put it next to my phone. It's got copies of every document, photo, record for the last year and a half, bank statements, connection logs, screenshots of conversations you've had on social media with people without me knowing I was seeing it. What kind of conversations? Well, like your correspondence with Carol, where you complain about your boring programmer husband who doesn't understand your needs, or your correspondence with Rachel, where you discuss the best way to get the most money out of the divorce. Linda's eyes widened in horror. You read my private messages? I read the messages that came in on the family tablet that was synchronized with your account. Remember, you set up that synchronization yourself so you wouldn't miss important messages when your phone was low on battery. That was true. A year ago, Linda asked me to set up my tablet so that it would receive copies of all her messenger messages. She wanted to be able to access correspondence with clients even when her main phone was unavailable. But she forgot to turn off private chats. Your correspondence with Carol from last month was particularly interesting, I continued. Quote, already found a lawyer who specializes in divorce proceedings. Says that if I file correctly, I can get at least half of all assets, plus alimony to maintain my lifestyle. Linda looked at me with an expression of utter horror. And this message from 2 weeks ago. Mark is ready to marry me as soon as I'm divorced. He has connections in legal circles, will help me find the best lawyer. The key is to play the situation right so Daniel looks guilty. That's enough, she whispered. There's more, I said calmly. Here's a message from a week ago. Taking him to dinner tomorrow and announcing the divorce. Mark says it's best to do it in a public place so he doesn't cause a scandal. I think Syson's would be fine, upscale and crowded. Linda dropped her head on her hands. It turns out that it wasn't you who chose the place for this conversation, but your lover, I said. He told you to wear that dress, didn't he? To look flawless on the day you destroy our family? Daniel, I can explain. Explain what? How you planned to get half the house I bought with the money I saved up before we met? How you were going to claim my stock in the company that I'd earned over the years? How did you want to play the victim of a failed marriage by hiding a year and a half of cheating? I paused, giving her a chance to answer, but she remained silent. Or explain how you were going to use the tapes of our conversations against me? Yeah, I know about that too. The call recording app on your phone. Very clever. Provoking me to make snarky remarks and then using them in court as evidence of my dismissive attitude. Linda raised her head and looked at me with tearful eyes. How did you know all this? I'm a computer programmer, Linda. My job is to find bugs in systems and understand why they happen. You were a bug in a system called our family, and I use the same methods I use at work. I took the flash drive and twirled it around in my hands. System analysis, collecting data, finding patterns, identifying the source of the problem, preparing a troubleshooting plan. Troubleshooting plan? Divorce on my terms. No property division, no alimony, no compensation for moral support, with me keeping everything that is truly mine by right. Linda looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You're not the person I thought you were. And you are exactly the person you turned out to be, I replied. Greedy, cynical, willing to cheat and betray for money. The difference is that I realized it a year and a half ago, and you only now. The waiter approached our table again with a question about dessert. I politely declined and asked for the bill. Linda sat silent, staring at a plate of untouched lobster. Supanawichom. You know what the saddest part of this whole story is? I said as the waiter walked away. If you had just come to me a year and a half ago and honestly said that you fell out of love, that you want to part, I would have agreed to a fair division of property. No scandals, no mudslinging, no trying to rip anyone off. Daniel, but you chose a different path. You thought I was stupid enough to trick me, use me, and then rob me. It was a mistake, Linda, a very expensive mistake. Here's the bill, $370 for lunch, most of which we didn't eat. I pulled out my credit card and handed it to the waiter. This is me paying for my last mistake, I said to Linda, for believing you 8 years ago. But every other mistake in this story is yours. While the waiter processed my card, Linda sat motionless, as if trying to digest what she had heard and realize the magnitude of the disaster that had struck her plans. Her face went through a whole gamut of emotions in a matter of minutes, from shock and horror to anger, from despair to calculating a new strategy. I watched this process with the interest of a programmer studying the behavior of a faulty system under load. When the waiter returned with the check and wished us a pleasant day, Linda suddenly came to life, as if awakened from a nightmare. Daniel, she said quietly, leaning across the table toward me, we can talk about this calmly, like adults. There's no need to make a tragedy out of this. A tragedy about what exactly? I asked, putting the flash drive back in my pocket. A year and a half of deception? The plans to rob me in the divorce? The fact that you spent our joint money on gifts for your lover? That's not robbery, she argued, a familiar note of conviction in her voice. It's a fair division of our jointly acquired property. I, too, have invested in our marriage, in our well-being. In what way? By cheating on me with the real estate developer? Don't be cynical. I'm talking about the years I've spent maintaining our home, our status in the community, the sacrifices I've made for our relationship. Linda said it with such sincerity that you could almost believe she was right. Almost. If it weren't for a year and a half of documented deception and divorce planning. What sacrifices, Linda? I asked. Do you mean the sacrifice of giving up honesty? Or the sacrifice of having to hide my relationship with Deborah? I mean the years of adjusting my life to your needs, she said, and now there was a touch of resentment in her voice. When I accepted your sedate lifestyle, your unwillingness to take risks and evolve. No one forced you. You knew who you were marrying. People change, Daniel. People grow. They have new needs. I've changed, and you've stayed the same. She tried to turn the conversation to philosophical differences, to portray our situation as a natural divergence between two people. It was a clever tactic, but a belated one. Linda, I said calmly, you can talk about growth and development all you want, but the fact remains that you've been cheating on me for a year and a half and planning a divorce to get half of my assets. That's not a philosophical difference. That's cheating and fraud. Fraud! Her voice got higher. Daniel, you're talking about your wife, not some street con artist. I'm talking about the woman who recorded our conversations to use against me in court. About the woman who consulted with an attorney on how to squeeze the most money out of the divorce. What do you call that if not fraud? Linda fell silent, realizing that her attempt to portray herself as an innocent victim of circumstance had failed. She considered a new strategy for a few seconds, and I could see another idea light up in her eyes. Okay, she said, changing her tone to a more businesslike one. Let's say you're right. Let's say I did make mistakes. But we can work this out between us without going to court and public scandal, can't we? What do you suggest? An amicable divorce. No mutual claims, no property division, no alimony. We just split up and move on with our lives. It wasn't a bad suggestion, but it was too simple. Linda's not the kind of person who gives up easily, especially when it comes to money. What do I get in return? I asked. What do you mean? I mean compensation for a year and a half of deception, for the money you spent on your lover, for the moral damage from your plans to rob me in the divorce. Linda's face became rigid. There will be no compensation, she said coldly. You'll get a divorce without property division, which is a gift considering the circumstances. What circumstances? The fact that you have no evidence of my infidelity that would hold up in court. I raised an eyebrow, surprised at such insolence. I have no proof. The pictures from the hotel don't prove anything, she said more confidently. The man's hand in the picture could be anyone's. Shadows in the snow aren't proof of adultery either. And bank statements only show my spending, not their purpose. Linda had clearly calmed down and started thinking like a lawyer. Perhaps she remembered the advice of that lawyer she consulted. As for the correspondence with her friends, she continued, those are private conversations obtained illegally. They would not be admissible as evidence in a court of law. The correspondence was on the family tablet, to which I had legal access, I reminded her. But you read it secretly, without my consent. That's a violation of privacy. Linda, do you really think you can get out of this with a legal technicality? My point is, you don't have hard evidence that I've been unfaithful. And without it, the court will consider our divorce as a divorce by mutual consent with the division of jointly acquired property. She was regaining her confidence, which didn't surprise me. Linda had always been able to adapt quickly to changed circumstances. Moreover, she continued, your following me could be considered psychological pressure and a violation of my rights. This will play in my favor in the division of property. Interesting logic, I said calmly. A wife cheats on her husband, plans to rob him, and then accuses him of violating her rights because he found out about it. Daniel, be realistic. Even if you prove cheating, it doesn't disqualify me from my share of the jointly acquired property. Canadian family law protects both parties. There was some truth to what she said. The Canadian courts are indeed quite liberal when it comes to the division of property in a divorce, and the fact of adultery does not always affect the material aspects of the case. Besides, Linda added with a cold smile, I have my trump cards. Tapes of our conversations where you disparage my career plans. Witnesses who will attest to your emotional coldness and unwillingness to support my endeavors. What witnesses? My girlfriends, co-workers, people who have observed our relationship from the sidelines. They'll tell the court what an indifferent husband you've been these past few years. Linda was getting into the swing of things, and I could see she was starting to believe she could win. The predatory fire in her eyes that I'd seen at the beginning of our conversation was back. And your obsession with snooping and gathering dirt characterizes you in a bad way, she continued. Normal husbands don't keep dossiers on their wives. It's a sign of paranoid and controlling behavior. Huh. Or a sign of discretion on the part of a man who senses a trick, I argued. The court might see it differently, especially if I told you how you restricted my freedom, controlled my every move, turned our house into a prison. Now she was openly fantasizing, but she did it with such conviction that one could almost believe her version of events. Linda, do you realize you're lying now? I asked. Sure, no, I'm telling you about how I felt in our marriage, about the pressure you put on me, about how you forced me to conform to your boring lifestyle. What pressure? I never pressured you into anything. Moral pressure, Daniel. Your constant disapproval of my plans, your unwillingness to support my ambitions, your attempts to keep me within your idea of the perfect wife. She said it with such passion that she almost believed her own words. Perhaps this is how the mechanism of self-justification works. First you make excuses for yourself, then you start to believe in them. And now tell me honestly, have any of you ever experienced a situation when a loved one turned reality upside down, turning yourself from a guilty person into a victim? How did you react to such attempts of manipulation? And were you able to stay calm when you were accused of something you didn't do? Share in the comments. Sometimes other people's experiences help you realize you're not alone in these situations. Okay, I said when Linda finished her tirade about my depressing behavior. Let's say you convince the court that I've been a bad husband. That doesn't negate the fact that you cheated and planned to rob me. It's not robbery, it's fair compensation for years of a failed marriage, she countered. Years during which you lived in a house I bought, drove a car I paid for, wore clothes I bought with my paycheck. Years during which I was your wife, maintained your status in society, made your home comfortable, sacrificed my interest for the sake of our relationship. We were going around in circles in this argument, and I realized that Linda was not going to give up without a fight. Moreover, she had clearly consulted an attorney and knew her rights better than I realized. Daniel, she said, changing her tone to a more conciliatory one, we can fight in court for months, spend money on lawyers, take it to the public, or we can settle humanly. What do you suggest? I asked, even though I suspected what she was getting at. A compromise. I give up half of the property in exchange for a third. You keep the house, the car, most of your savings. I get reasonable compensation for my years of marriage and a chance to start a new life with dignity. A third of everything I've earned in my life? A third of what we've made together in 8 years of marriage, she clarified. That's fair, Daniel. Much fairer than leaving me with nothing after 8 years of marriage. There was logic in her suggestion, but I resented the woman's sheer audacity. She had cheated on me, planned to rob me, and now she was demanding compensation for years of living together. And if I don't agree to your terms, I asked, then we'll meet in court, she replied coldly. And there I'll fight for my rights in every way I can. I have a good lawyer, Daniel, a very good one, and a very expensive one. Let me guess, Devereux is helping with the legal fees? Mark supports me in my time of need, she confirmed, without a shadow of shame. He realizes I deserve to be treated fairly. I see. Your lover is funding your war against me. Very romantic. Don't be sarcastic. Mark just wants me to get what's rightfully mine. Or he wants you to come to him with money instead of empty hands, I suggested. Linda's face darkened. What are you saying? I'm saying that successful businessmen rarely marry broke divorcees. Devereaux is interested in you getting your share of the divorce. It's an investment in your relationship. You're a cynical bastard, she hissed. Maybe I am, but I'm a truthful bastard, and that's a big difference. Linda stared at me with undisguised hatred for a few seconds, then pulled herself together and went back to being businesslike. Okay, Daniel, one last offer. A quarter of the estate, and we part peacefully. That's my final compromise. And what do I get in return, other than the pleasure of giving you a quarter of everything I've earned? You get a quiet, quick divorce with no public scandal, no sordid details in the press, no discussion of your paranoia and controlling behavior on social media. That was an overt threat. Are you threatening me? I asked. I'm explaining the consequences of your choices. If we don't come to an amicable agreement, the divorce will become public and painful for both of us, but especially for you. Why especially for me? Because I have more friends in the media. Because public opinion tends to sympathize with women in divorce proceedings. And because a story about a paranoid programmer who spied on his wife would be far more interesting to the press than a trivial story about infidelity. Linda leaned back in her chair with a satisfied look. Think about it, Daniel. Your reputation, your job, your opportunity to build a new relationship, all of that could suffer if our divorce becomes public. Wouldn't your reputation suffer from accusations of infidelity? My line of work is more tolerant of personal weaknesses, she grinned. Business knows how to separate professional qualities from personal life. But in IT, reputation means a lot. She was right. A scandalous divorce could really hurt my career, especially if Linda could make me look bad. So what is it, Daniel? She asked, leaning across the table. A quarter of the estate for a quiet divorce? Or would you prefer a public war with an unpredictable outcome? I looked at this woman I'd lived with for 8 years and didn't recognize her. In front of me sat a cold-blooded manipulator, ready to use any method to achieve his goals. Maybe she'd always been like that, and I just hadn't seen that side of her. I need time to think, I said finally. You don't have much time, she warned me. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. With or without my conditions, it's up to you. Linda got up from the table, picked up her purse, and adjusted her dress. Goodbye, Daniel. I hope you make the right decision. She walked away, leaving me alone at the table with the remains of the most expensive lunch of my life. But I knew she didn't have all the cards in her hand. I also had trumps she didn't even realize she had. After Linda left, I sat in the restaurant for another half hour, finishing my cold coffee and mulling over her suggestions. The waiters were starting to look at me with a little bewilderment. Lunchtime was coming to an end, and I continued to occupy the table by the window, staring at the bay and not paying attention to the others. I needed to digest the conversation and make a final decision on how to proceed. Linda left in full confidence that she had cornered me. A quarter of the estate for a quiet divorce versus a public war with an unpredictable outcome? At first glance, the choice was obvious. Any reasonable person would have compromised to avoid scandal and preserve their reputation. But Linda underestimated two things: my integrity and my readiness for such a development. The fact is, I hadn't just been gathering evidence of her infidelity for the past year and a half. I was preparing for war on all fronts, studying Canadian family law, consulting with lawyers, analyzing precedents of similar divorces. And I did have some trump cards that Linda didn't even realize she had. The first trump card was in my pocket, not the flash drive I'd shown her, but another with much more compromising material. The thing is, Devereaux turned out not to be as careful on social media as his mistress. His Instagram contained photos that, when properly interpreted, clearly indicated the nature of their relationship. A month ago, Devereaux posted a photo of an expensive women's bracelet with the caption, "Gift for a special lady." That same day, Linda showed up at home with the exact same bracelet, saying she bought it for herself as a reward for a successful transaction. 2 weeks ago, he posted a picture of a bouquet of white orchids with the caption, "She loves orchids." Our living room was full of white orchids that Linda supposedly bought herself to decorate the house. But the most compelling evidence was a photo that Devereaux posted a week ago and deleted a few hours later, apparently realizing his mistake. Selfies in a car with a woman's hand on his shoulder. The hand is wearing the very bracelet he gave to a special lady, and on the ring finger of that hand is the engagement ring I gave Linda 8 years ago. Of course, I saved a screenshot of this photo before it was deleted, as well as many other snapshots where, upon close examination, details could be found that indicated my wife's presence. A reflection in a mirror, a shadow on the wall, articles of clothing or accessories I recognized. The second trump card was more serious. Studying Devereaux's financial records and public company information is available to everyone. I discovered an interesting detail. His construction company was not in the best financial condition. Several major projects had been frozen due to financing problems, and the debt load had risen 30% in the last year. The successful businessman Linda described as his savior was actually in need of a financial safety cushion himself. His interest in my wife's divorce was far from disinterested. He needed the money to save his business, and dividing up my assets could solve his problems. The third bargaining chip was Linda herself. An in-depth examination of her business dealings revealed several interesting points. In particular, 2 months ago, she took out a large loan against our house without informing me. Technically, she had the right to do so, since she was a co-owner of the property. But the intended use of this money turned out to be quite curious. According to the bank documents, the loan was taken for business development. In fact, most of the money was used to cover Devereaux's debts. My wife actually mortgaged our house to finance her lover's business. That's not just adultery anymore. It's family asset fraud. The fourth and most powerful trump card I was saving for last. The fact that the house, which Linda considered jointly acquired property, in fact was bought exclusively with my money, accumulated before the marriage. I purposely didn't mention it during our conversation at the restaurant, letting her think she had a claim to the property. But there were documents in my safe that proved the origin of the funds to buy the house. Certificates from previous jobs, bank statements proving savings. When we bought the property, I made it a joint property for romantic reasons, but I kept all the proof that the funds were mine alone. Under Canadian law, property purchased with funds accumulated before marriage is not subject to division in a divorce. Even if it was registered as joint property, it is possible to prove in court that one of the spouses has a preemptive right to such property. It turned out that Linda not only did not get half or a quarter of my property, but also risked losing the right to live in the house, which she mortgaged without my consent. And the loan she had taken out against that mortgage would become her personal problem. When I returned home after lunch, I found that Linda had already packed her bags and left. On the kitchen table was a note. "Daniel, I'm moving in with a friend. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Last chance to make a human arrangement. Call before midnight. L." I crumpled up the note and tossed it in the trash. There would be no more negotiations. Linda had made her choice a year and a half ago when she decided to cheat on me and plan my robbery. Now it was time for payback. The next morning, I was in the office of Mark Stanley, one of the best family law attorneys in Vancouver. I had chosen him for a reason. Stanley specialized in defending men in complex divorce cases and had a reputation for ruthless but fair professionalism. "Interesting case," said Stanley, after studying the materials I had presented to him. "You have a really impressive dossier on your wife, but you realize that she won't give up without a fight?" "I do," I replied. "That's why I'm here." "Good. Good. Then we'll start by filing a counterclaim for dissolution of marriage on the grounds of adultery, plus a lawsuit for financial damages related to the misuse of marital funds. What are our chances?" With this much evidence, excellent, especially considering the fact that the house was purchased with prenuptial funds. That changes the balance of power dramatically. A week later, the real war began. Linda, as promised, filed for divorce, demanding property division, but at the same time she received my counterclaim, which came as a complete surprise. Her lawyer, that very good and very expensive specialist, was not ready for such a volume of compromising materials. Photographs, bank documents, records of correspondence, evidence of misuse of credit. All this turned the case into a nightmare for Linda's defense. The most painful blow was the disclosure of the origin of the funds to buy the house. When Linda's attorney realized that not only would his client get nothing, but she risked owing the bank a loan she could not repay, he began to encourage her to settle. "Your position is hopeless," he explained to Linda in one of the sessions, which I watched with barely concealed amusement. "Mr. Whitman can prove not only adultery, but misuse of family funds. Plus, he has documentation of the origin of the funds for the real estate purchase. What does that mean? Linda asked, not as confident as she had been a month ago. It means that not only will you get nothing in the division of property, but you will be obliged to compensate for the damage to the family budget. Plus, repay the loan you took out on a house you no longer have any rights to. Linda's face grew paler and paler as the lawyer explained the consequences of her actions. How much will it cost? About $400,000. The loan plus interest plus damages for emotional distress. I don't have that kind of money. Then you should ask Mr. Whitman for leniency and agree to his terms. My terms were very simple. Divorce without property division, no alimony, repayment of the loan at her expense, reimbursement of her lover's expenses from the family budget. In total, Linda had to pay me about $200,000. After 2 months of court battles, Linda gave up. Devereaux, learning about the scale of her debts, suddenly cooled to the idea of marrying a ruined divorcee. Moreover, he began to avoid meeting with her, fearing that the creditors may claim against him as the actual recipient of the borrowed funds. The final meeting at my attorney's office was a triumph of justice. Linda signed the documents with a trembling hand, and I watched the collapse of all her plans to enrich herself at my expense. "Jordan, Daniel," she said after signing the last document, "I hope you realize you've gone too far." "On the contrary," I replied calmly, "I have reached exactly the point I needed to reach. Justice has been done. You ruined my life. You destroyed our family. I just wouldn't let you ruin my life as well." Linda stood up and headed for the exit, but turned around at the door. "It's going to take me months to pay off this debt, maybe years. You have a job, you have an education, you have connections. You'll be fine," I replied. "By the way, good luck finding a new husband. I hope the next one will be more lenient on adultery and financial fraud." After she left, Stanley's lawyer shook my hand. "A beautiful victory," he said, "but do you realize you've made an enemy for life?" "Better to have an honest enemy than a lying friend," I replied. Tiger met me at home. I'd gotten him from the shelter a week after the divorce proceedings began. The tawny redhead with the white chest was a much more loyal companion than my ex-wife. He didn't lie about his needs, plan my robbery, or spend my money on gifts for other cats. It's been 2 years since the divorce was finalized. Linda pays off my debt in monthly installments by working at a small real estate agency. Her own business had to close due to financial problems. Devereaux went bust a year and a half ago when banks refused to extend his loans. His company was sold under the hammer, and he himself moved to another city. I'm still working as a programmer, promoted to lead systems architect. I live in the same house, but now it seems more cozy without the atmosphere of lies and mistrust. I meet Sarah, the veterinarian Tiger introduced me to. She was treating him for a cold at the vet clinic. Sarah is 32 years old, smart, honest, and not interested in my bank accounts. We've been together for 8 months, and so far neither of us is in a hurry to make a serious commitment. After my experience with Linda, I've learned to value simple human qualities more than outward glitz and ambition. Sometimes I think about how our life with Linda would have turned out if she had just told the truth a year and a half ago. If she had admitted that she had fallen out of love, that she wanted to break up, that she had met someone else. Maybe we would have divorced in a civilized manner, dividing our assets equitably. But Linda chose the path of lies and deceit, the path of attempted robbery under the guise of divorce, and that choice cost her dearly. The lesson she learned was harsh but fair. Lies and betrayal have a price, and that price may be higher than one expects. Now tell us honestly in the comments, how many of you have gone through a divorce and how did it affect your faith in people? Have you encountered situations when a loved one turned out to be not at all who he or she claimed to be? And how did you find the strength to start anew after the betrayal? It is especially interesting to know the opinion of those who have been married for a long time. Do people change dramatically over time? Or do they just stop hiding their true nature? And do you believe that it is possible to build happy relationships after a painful divorce? Or does the trauma of betrayal remain with a person forever? Share your stories, support each other in the comments. Sometimes someone else's experience helps you realize that you are not alone in your worries, and that even after the most difficult divorce, life can become better and happier. The main thing is not to lose faith that honesty and justice will always find a way to prevail, even if it takes time and patience.